Throughout this work, one thing has been made abundantly clear. The progressive policies of the District of Columbia City Council are simply not working. We cannot allow further pro-crime policies to be put into place while this crisis continues. Citizens of D.C. and the visitors of our nation's capital deserve to feel safe. This bill is a great step towards ensuring our capital city is going to be safe. I encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
If the gentleman from Florida can actually immediately make everyone safe, he should not only be Donald Trump's running mate, as I keep hearing about, he should be the mayor of the District of Columbia. Amazingly, the gentleman proposes this naked power grab against Washington, denying them the crime-fighting tools they need, despite the fact that they've done a good job and total crime in D.C. is down 16% in 2024 compared to the same period last year, which was conceded by the Republicans in the Rules Committee yesterday. There's been a 26% reduction in violent crime in 2024, which they conceded in the Rules Committee yesterday, and a 22% reduction in homicides. In other words, local democracy works. Let the local governments respond to the problems they're having. But our colleagues insist that crime is still spiking in D.C., despite the evidence to the contrary. So what is their big tough-on-crime solution? The bold solution they offer us to combat crime in the nation's capital is to prohibit the D.C. Council from ever increasing any criminal penalties and blocking the D.C. Council from ever creating any new crimes. And if that's not what they intend to do, then I think they need to go back and try again. I want to start by humbly suggesting that the majority needs someone new working on legislative acronyms for these messaging bills. This is the D.C. Crimes Act, which stands for the D.C. Reforms to Immediately Make Everyone Safe Act of 2024. Immediately make everyone safe. That doesn't sound like legislation. It sounds like a Penn and Teller magic trick to me. The Immediately Make Everyone Safe Act is the fourth bill the majority has now brought to the floor to vilify, heckle, and micromanage the elected mayor and council of the District of Columbia on the appalling conceit that the distinguished members of the Republican conference from Florida or Kentucky or Arizona care more about public safety and public welfare in Washington, D.C. than do the 700,000 people who live there and their elected officials on the D.C. Council and the mayor. But this one is even more sweeping and radical than the prior bills. It doesn't simply overturn one specific current D.C. law. It permanently strips D.C. of authority over any of its criminal laws, making this legislation, perhaps inadvertently, I concede, the largest proposed rollback of D.C.'s authority to govern itself in nearly 30 years. Now, our colleagues may be shocked to learn during this debate what exactly it is they're being asked to vote for today. At the Rules Committee meeting yesterday, I asked the Republican members whether they understood what this bill actually does if you take the time to read the language. None of them seemed to know. So let me explain. The bill amends the D.C. Home Rule Act to say that the D.C. Council may not, quote, enact any act, resolution, or rule to change any criminal sentence in effect on the date of the enactment of the D.C. Crimes Act of 2024. In other words, if this bill becomes law, the D.C. Council could never increase criminal penalties again without Congress acting first, nor could it create any new criminal offenses at all. That is their big tough-on-crime package they offer the Congress. No increases in criminal sentences indefinitely in the District of Columbia, and no new offenses can be passed at all. Say the D.C. Council wanted to create a new criminal offense for, say, directing an organized retail theft ring. Well, Mr. Donald's bill would prevent them from doing it. Say D.C. wanted to make it a crime to possess a firearm with a removed or altered or mutilated serial number under Mr. Donald's bill, they would be barred from doing so. But in fact, that's precisely what D.C. just did a few months ago. My Republican colleagues seem blissfully oblivious to the fact that earlier this year, responding to the spike in crime occurring across America, not just in Washington, D.C., of course, the D.C. Council passed a 63-page law called the Secure D.C. Omnibus Act of 2024, which dramatically increased criminal penalties for 9 different crimes and created 6 new criminal offenses. The D.C. bill, which was passed unanimously by the council and signed into law by the mayor, does what Republicans have so eloquently been orating about on the floor. It increased criminal penalties, including for gun crimes, violence in parks, violence committed against vulnerable people, violence committed against rideshare drivers, metro drivers, and transit workers. The Secure D.C. Act also created a host of new offenses, including directing a retail theft ring, strangulation, firing bullets in public, possessing a firearm with a removed or altered serial number, and unlawful discarding of firearms or ammunition. They addressed the actual problems that they're experiencing in their city, something our colleagues seriously know nothing about and don't care about. But if Mr. Donald's bill had actually been law at the time, the D.C. Council would have been barred from enacting all of these tough-on-crime penalties altogether. And they will be barred in the future from responding to the kinds of spikes in crime that they experience. For my Republican colleagues who love to castigate the people of D.C., who I concede voted more than 90% against Donald Trump in the last election, I would respectfully suggest that they consider the following fact. D.C. has higher maximum criminal penalties than many Republican states do. Let's compare. The maximum penalty for armed robbery in D.C. is 30 years. In Kentucky, represented by the chairman of the Oversight Committee, the maximum is 20 years, 50% less. In North Dakota, it is 10 years or 66% less. In D.C., criminals can receive a 40-year sentence for armed carjacking. In Kentucky, represented by the chairman of the Oversight Committee, carjacking is not a separate independent offense. You've got to charge somebody with armed robbery, but even then, you can only get half the sentence you can get in D.C. for carjacking. Look, despite all of the fine election year rhetoric we've heard, there's something profoundly antithetical to our system of government in what the gentleman is proposing. If you read the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson set forth a bill of particulars against King George and the Parliament. And one of the central allegations of it was that they were denying the colonists the right to define criminal offenses for themselves. People over in England were dictating to people in our country what the criminal offenses should be. And that's like, with all due respect, the gentleman from Florida dictating the people in Washington, D.C., how they should order their affairs when it comes to the criminal law. Jefferson would have understood very well this situation that we're in, and our friends in Washington, 713,000 tax-paying, draftable U.S. citizens have petitioned for statehood because they no longer want to be kicked around by other people's representatives. They want to have an equal say in this body, an equal say in the U.S. Senate, and they don't want other people's representatives telling them that they can't pass the criminal offenses or the increased criminal sentences that they want for their crimes. I'll reserve. Thank you.